Hi, I'm Dr. Brooks Mullen, and welcome to Blue Collar Economics. Today, we're going to continue talking about markets. More specifically, we're going to talk about the characteristics that define a market system. The first major characteristic of a market system is private property rights. What defines a market system is that the individual and not the government controls the majority of the factors of production. In fact, capitalism, as we said before, takes its name from the private ownership of capital. So this private property rights is kind of the quintessential defining aspect of a market system. Private property rights encourage economic activity. They encourage investment. They encourage economic exchange. They encourage the maintenance of property. And by encouraging those things, they encourage economic growth. Again, remember, market systems rely on the fact that people are rationally self-interested. They're going to do what's in their own best interest to maximize their utility. By giving people private property rights, we are going to utilize that aspect of human behavior to generate economic growth. Now, when we talk about private property rights, that's not just physical property. That extends to intellectual property. Three main kinds of intellectual property we've got to talk about. That's patents, copyrights, and trademarks. A patent or a patent, depending on which side of the English language you're on, is the ownership of a product or process. A copyright is the ownership of a piece of artistic creation, and a trademark is the ownership of iconography or other identifying imagery associated with a brand or product. Now, talk about these things in some later video. They have different lifespans and all of that. But why do we have intellectual property? For the same reason we have private property, because it encourages people to develop intellectual property. If somebody is going to spend years of their life working on some piece of artistic creation only for somebody else to come along and steal it, they're not going to make that initial investment, or at least they would be less likely to invest that time. So by allowing people to own their artistic creations, we encourage people to create more art, to maintain that art, to curate that art, to distribute that art. The purpose of private property rights, whether we are talking about intellectual property or we're talking about physical property, again, is about encouraging economic exchange, to encourage economic activity. At the end of the day, what private property rights give us is the ability to focus on generating production and output rather than protecting our own property. Imagine a world without private property rights. Whoever occupies the thing is effectively the owner of the thing. You leave your house, you come back from work, somebody else is in your house with a gun, they claim that's their house now, and now that's their house. So think about how non-productive we would be as a society without private property rights. If you're going to have a house, that means you're going to need someone to generate economic income for that house, but you're also going to need other people to protect that house. So rather than having 5 adults in 5 houses working 5 jobs, generating 5 people's production, we've got 5 adults living in one property, 1 or 2 of those adults leaving the house to earn for the property, and the other 3 staying behind to defend the property from being expropriated. So right away, we've taken 60% of our labor force and we've put them into non-production. So you can see, even really early on, we need private property rights to facilitate any kind of actual efficient economic exchange. The next 2 components that make up a market system are 2 different types of freedom: the freedom of enterprise and the freedom of choice. The freedom of enterprise, simply put, is that people are allowed to start whatever business they can within reason start. Now, obviously, you can't start a murder for hire business. There's laws about that. But generally speaking, the freedom of enterprise means that you can muster your economic resources to produce the goods and services that you want to produce and to sell those goods and services in the markets that they're available to be sold in. The freedom of enterprise is very much the freedom to start a business and to operate that business and then to be able to also close that business and exit the market should you so choose. On the more individual side of things, we have the freedom of choice. Freedom of choice means that workers have the ability to choose to do the jobs for which they are qualified and that are hiring. And that individuals, us as consumers, have the ability to buy the goods and services that we can afford and to not buy goods and services that we don't want to purchase. We have the choice to buy or not buy. We have the choice to work at a place or not work at a place. That's the freedom of choice. Another major characteristic of market systems is the reliance on self-interest. Now, we've talked about self-interest before when we talked about rational self-interest, but market systems rely on, they exploit rational self-interest. As self-interested entities, each person in the economy is going to seek to maximize the utility they receive for the resources they have available. Entrepreneurs, that's business owners, are going to seek to maximize the profits or at the very least minimize the losses they are earning. Property owners are going to seek to maximize the price they receive for their property or the rental rate they receive for the use of their property. Workers are going to seek to maximize their utility through a combination of wages earned, hours worked, fringe benefits received, and overall working conditions. Consumers seek to minimize their expenditure on items and in so doing, try to maximize their utility through a combination of goods and services that they purchase. Now, whether we're talking about a business owner or a corporation or an individual or a worker or a consumer, every angle we can take in the economy, self-interest gives direction and clarity to what could otherwise be a chaotic economic existence. Self-interest guides the decision-making of all the agents in the economy. The next major component of a market system often goes overlooked in today's economy, and that is competition. Competition is necessary for a market to function efficiently. The market system depends on competition between individually acting economic agents. In order to have competition, you need two or more buyers and you need two or more sellers, all of whom are acting independently in pursuing their own rational self-interest. They use their freedom of choice and their freedom of enterprise to produce and consume goods and services. Now, this then regulates prices. The freedom of enterprise enables businesses to enter and leave markets, controlling what we call supply. The freedom of choice allows consumers to enter and leave markets, controlling what we call demand. Don't worry, we've got a whole nother video coming later where we just talk about supply and we just talk about demand and we talk about supply and demand and how they interact with each other. But for now, we're just talking about competition, that it's necessary to underpin the functioning of a market system. Competition performs a very important function. It diffuses power that can be held by individuals or entities or households within the market system. Without competition, a single buyer or a single seller would be able to control the price in the marketplace. But with competition, if a seller charges a price that's too high, another seller comes in and undercuts that price. So to get efficient pricing, to get the lowest possible price for the good, we need competition amongst sellers in a marketplace. In later videos, once we've kind of established some more economic basics, we'll talk about what happens when competition is reduced and how that distorts economic efficiency. The next two major characteristics of a market system are two things that are a little inseparable, and that's markets and prices. I know, big surprise. A market system contains markets. But markets, like we said before, are the actual places, be they physical or virtual, that bring buyers and sellers together. And the output of buyers and sellers' activity in markets is prices. Prices allow us to ration our income amongst a variety of goods and services and choosing those which maximize our personal utility. The next major defining characteristic of a market system is the reliance on technology and capital goods. Now, the way things work in a market system, whoever can generate production, whoever can generate the actual output of goods and services receives income for doing so. The monetary rewards for developing new products and new production techniques flow to the innovator. And so as a result, in a market system, there is a constant pressure to develop, to innovate new forms of production technology and new forms of production capital. Now, when we say capital in economics, capital has a very specific definition in economics. And that definition is capital are goods used in the production of other goods and services, things that go into producing goods and services. So everything from tools to computing equipment, to production facilities, to factories, to storage facilities, to marketing technologies, to distribution networks. All of those are forms of capital. Now, again, the market system encourages development of newer, more efficient capital. If you can develop a means to more efficiently produce output, you can either produce that output yourself and sell at a lower price and gain the profits from doing that, or you can sell the technology to produce at a lower cost to people that are already producing. If you can find out a more efficient way to market, a more efficient way to distribute, a more efficient way to provide internal communications, you can sell that to producers for a profit. The market system pays whoever innovates newer, more efficient means to produce, and as such, rational self-interest encourages this constant stream of innovation. So, improvements in efficiency improve overall capability, and the economy becomes overall more efficient and more effective. Now, another major characteristic that we see in market systems is active but limited government. I know those two things are politically charged, but understand, we talked about this before. There are market failures. There are things the free market does not efficiently allocate. And we need government to actively step in to protect private property rights, to actively step in to correct for market failures, to deal with market power, to deal with externalities. That government needs to be active. It needs to actually get involved, but it needs to be limited. If government gets too involved, then government and not the individual is making the economic resource allocation decisions, and then we're not a market system anymore. We're a command system. The next major hallmark of a market system is specialization. Specialization is the use of the resources of an individual or a firm or a nation to produce a limited range of products rather than every single product possible. Now, we see specialization in many forms. Most common one we like to cite when we talk about the behavior of market economies is the specialization of labor. there is a thing called the learning curve. Essentially works like this. The more repetitions you perform of something, the faster and faster you become at it. Whatever your job is, just think about your job. Think about when you started at your job and think about a task you perform regularly, every day or every week or even multiple times a day, maybe. And think about how long that took you the first day you started your job to perform that task versus how long it takes you now. In most instances, I bet you got faster at completing that task over time. It took you less time to file your reports, or it took you less time to complete this step in a machining process, or it took you less time to perform this series of accounting steps. Whatever your job is, whatever your career is, we all have a learning curve. The more we perform something, the faster, the more efficient to a point we get at performing that task. And the specialization of labor makes use of that learning curve. By having an employee or by having a productive worker focus on a task or a range of tasks rather than every single task in the production process, they get to climb that learning curve faster. And if you distribute that across all your workers in a factory, the whole factory becomes more efficient, quicker. Now, there are other things we get from the specialization of labor. Labor is inherently unequal. Some of us are born with certain sets of skills that make us good at some things and not at other things. This is just the reality of the human condition. And by specializing labor, we allow people to focus on what they are best suited at completing, what they are most efficient at completing. So we utilize our labor in the way that is the most efficient, generating the most output for the least amount of input. Another form of specialization you see across market economies is geographic specialization. Like the name implies, it's specializing based on geographic region. Some regions have inherently more resource endowments than other regions. A region that is rich in oil is probably also going to specialize in oil refining. A region that is rich in high quality soil is probably going to specialize in agricultural production. As with certain things, agriculture is just the most obvious place to look. We get degrees of geographic specialization based on resource endowments. So for example, if you want to grow coffee, coffee can only grow above a certain altitude. It requires incredibly nitrogen-rich soil, which you typically only find on the sides of volcanoes. So as a result, the places in the world that have volcanic mountains above a certain altitude that get a certain amount of rainfall per year are going to be places that naturally can specialize in growing coffee. So we see coffee in Hawaii, we see coffee in Jamaica, we see coffee in Colombia, we see coffee in various parts of Africa. Why? Because they have the geographic resources necessary, so those regions are geographically specialized in making coffee. And finally, market systems are defined by the use of money. But we want to talk about what money is. Let's take a second and talk about the world before money. Now, yes, when we're talking the world before money, when we're talking human civilization before money, we are talking very early on in the development of human civilization. But if you go back to the earliest tribes of hunter-gatherers, you would find a system of economic exchange called barter. Barter is trading goods and services for other goods and services. And barter relies on a thing we call the double coincidence of wants. That is, that for a barter exchange to occur, one of us has to have something the other one wants, and that other one also has to have something that the first person wants. I got to have something you want, you got to have something I want. If we both have those things, we can make a trade. And it is this double coincidence of once that makes barter so inefficient, bordering on impossible to actually organize an economy around. Now, yes, there are people out there that will say, oh, what about Burning Man? Burning Man's not a capitalist entity. Burning Man is a barter economy. No, at Burning Man, they use drugs in place of money. Everyone barters for drugs, and drugs act as a form of currency. We won't say money, talk about why here in a second, but no, Burning Man does not actually rely on some sort of barter economy that could be a model for a broader economy. And here's why. Let's go back to that double coincidence of once. Let's say we're all together in a tiny village. And in this village, we've got people that fish, people that collect and trap lobsters, people that build huts, people that collect coconuts, people that collect fresh vegetables, people that raise pigs, and on down the list, right? All the typical things you'd think of in a desert island, tropical paradise, like a Moana type movie. Now, let's say I'm a fisherman and I want to get the roof on my hut thatched. Now, what do? Well, I catch fish. I take fish to the guy who thatches roofs, and I say, hey, I'll trade you fish for thatching my roof. Now, let's say he wants fish. All right, barter works. I give him fish, he fixes my roof, we're all copacetic. But what if he doesn't want fish? What if he wants lobster? Then I got to go to the guy that catches lobster and say, hey, can I trade you lobster for fish so I can go trade those lobsters for a roof? And what if the lobsterman doesn't want fish? What if instead he wants coconuts? Then I got to walk to the other side of the island and see if I can trade fish for coconuts so I can trade coconuts for lobster so I can trade lobster for a roof. And the person that gets the coconuts, they don't want fish. They want fresh vegetables. So then I got to go to the person who gathers fresh vegetables, and I got to trade fish for vegetables. So I can trade vegetables for a coconut. So I can trade coconuts for lobsters. So I can trade lobster. You get the point. Very, very quickly, instead of an exchange occurring, I have spent all day moving across this island working out a deal. You know what I haven't been doing all day? Fishing. Fish production in the village is now down substantially because I spend more of my day negotiating trades for fish than I actually do fishing. Now, that's just in a simple world where we talk about 5 goods. Now, imagine a more complicated world. Imagine a world as complicated as ours is. The entire system of barter would fail to keep up. We would spend all of our time trying to facilitate trades rather than actually engaging in economic exchange. Now, for you sports fans out there, in America, we do this ridiculous system where we trade players. So if I want to get rid of player X and I want to hire player Y, I've got to figure out a way to trade player X for player Y. But if they don't want player Y, they want player Z, then I got to see if I can trade X for Z, and then Z moves there, then Y moves to me, and you get these elaborate 3- and 4-way trades worked out. People that play fantasy sports know what I'm talking about. It's an incredibly inefficient system. You know how they do in European football and proper football? That's a ball, a round thing that kick with your foot, that thing on the end of your leg. In proper European football, if you want a player that's on another team, you buy out that player's contract and then offer them a contract. That's it. You literally just buy or sell the resource you want rather than spend all this time figuring out these elaborate trades. European football is ironically much more market-oriented and pro-capitalist than American sports are, where we have these antiquated rules about trading and salary limits and blah, 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 blah. So, what does that mean for us? It means that barter is an inefficient system because it relies on the double coincidence of once. And barter gives way to the use of money very early on in human civilizations. In fact, Hunter-gatherers use primitive forms of money. You can talk about wampum. You could talk about specific kinds of shells that were used by hunter-gatherer tribes. But what is money? Money is anything that performs three functions. If it does these three things, it's money. If it doesn't do those three things, if it doesn't do all three of them, it's not money. So let's talk about that. Number one, money is a medium of exchange. We all agree to accept money in exchange for goods and services. That's why if you pull out a US dollar, it says this dollar is legal tender for all debts, public and private. It's literally telling you on the piece of paper, I am money. I am a medium of exchange. Now, most people, when they think of money, they're stop at the medium of exchange function. They stop there, but that's not enough for something to be money. Money also has to be a store of value. What that means is that the money holds its value reasonably well over time. Now, yes, inflation can reduce the purchasing power of currency, and low and stable inflation is not going to overall undermine the store of value function in money. Now, hyperinflation can, we'll talk about that in a later lecture, but generally speaking, money has to maintain its value reasonably well over time. Now, if money is a medium of exchange and money is a store of value, then money can perform the third function, which is acting as a unit of account. Money, if everything can be priced in money, everything is traded in terms of money, and that money's value is relatively consistent over time, we can use money to track the value of things over time. That's what we call accountancy. So a couple of bits on that. Number one, when we talk about the store of value function, this is why cryptocurrency is not considered money by economists. Cryptocurrency, even stable coins, are highly volatile in price. Their value pings up and down all day long, 24/7, 365. So accurately pricing things in terms of cryptocurrency, you can't say, well, it was worth 3 USD coin today, it's worth 3 USD coin tomorrow, because what the value of 3 USD coin is fluctuates so much day to day. So cryptocurrency doesn't perform the store of value function, so it can't perform the unit of account function. Just because it's accepted as a medium of exchange does not in and of itself make crypto money. That's why it's called cryptocurrency and not crypto money. Now, on that idea of the unit of account function, remember, money and accountancy are very, 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 very old. What's the oldest form of writing that we know of? It's Babylonian cuneiform writing. Now, amongst other things, cuneiform, we know from historical documents, was used in a system of accounting. Some of the oldest written texts in human history, that writing that allows us to transcend time, to pass knowledge on to other individuals. So things don't have to be reinvented and re-innovated every single generation. That all-powerful tool that separates human knowledge from the animals, one of its original functions was accountancy. So what were they accounting with? Well, what would you think of if I said, the king gave you a lot of money? You'd probably think of a chest filled with gold coins. So let's talk about gold. Why was gold so universally accepted as money? Well, let's start with number one. Gold is shiny, and human beings love shiny things. We evolved way back in the day from simple tree-dwelling creatures and reptiles. And you know what those early land dwellers had to learn? Clear water is shiny. Clear water is drinkable and good. So somewhere way back in your lizard brain, when you see something shiny, it goes, ooh, clean drinking water, me like. Human beings love shiny stuff. Now, what else is true about gold? Gold is malleable, right? You don't need to be able to heat gold in a forge to forge gold. You can literally pound it into shapes. So gold was shiny and easily shapeable, so people desired it for jewelry and thus for trade. But beyond that, what made gold stand out as early money as opposed to silver, as opposed to copper, as opposed to iron? Very simple. There's one thing that gold doesn't do that other minerals do. Gold doesn't oxidize. It doesn't rust. In the presence of oxygen, it does not decay away. You take exactly 1 gram of gold. You go all the way to the bottom of the Challenger Deep. You dig a hole 1,000 feet deep in the Challenger Deep, making it the deepest hole in the deepest part of planet Earth. And you bury that gram of gold there for 1,000 years. You come back, it's still a gram of gold. Gold is very long-lived stuff. It's a very long half-life. It comes to us from the hearts of ancient stars. But gold doesn't decay. And as such, you can keep it for a long time. It doesn't lose its value. So everybody wanted gold because it's shiny and malleable, and it doesn't decay in value. So that meant we could start using it for accountancy. We could use it as a unit of account. And that's why gold shows up all over the world in disparate cultures, but still being used as money, because gold did those 3 things. So once again, what is money? Money is anything that is accepted as a medium of exchange, that is a store of value, that holds its value reasonably well over time, and that because it does those 2 functions, we can keep track of everything in terms of that money. We can perform the unit of account function. If it does those 3 things, it's money. If it doesn't do those 3 things, it's not money. And that'll do it for today, y'all. Once again, I'm Dr. Brooks Mullen. This was Blue Collar Economics, and I'll see you next time.